Hello, welcome to Wales Today. I'm Nick Savini on Budget Day here at the Senedd, where increases have been set out for all Welsh Government departments. Hundreds of millions of pounds extra is to be ploughed into the NHS, with spending on buildings and equipment to go up by 40%. But will it make any difference?
The people who work in our NHS will be able to have the best equipment, the most up-to-date equipment. They will be able to process more tests, look at more scans.
From schools to social care, we'll assess what impact all of this will have on the delivery of public services across Wales.
Also in the programme tonight, working to restore supplies, but thousands of people remain without power, with a warning it may not be back for some until at least Thursday. And a review finds victims of child sexual abuse were treated in a heartless and hostile way by monks on Caldy Island. Rebecca says the abbey's response to the abuse she suffered made it 1,000,000 times worse.
Good evening. Well, the stakes are certainly high for the Welsh Government with the next Senedd election on the horizon. And to be fair, some of the figures bandied around today were very high as well as the Welsh Government set out its draft budget. Probably going too far to say Christmas has come early, but there were increases across the board in every Welsh Government department. Compare that to just a year ago, where the only increase was in the NHS and in trains. So let's look through some of the figures. The annual budget for the Welsh Government next year is going to be £26 billion. That is an increase of £1.5 billion on the previous year. We have to talk about the NHS, of course. It accounts for more than half that everything that is spent. And £600 million extra is to go towards the NHS next year. That is a 3.8% increase for day-to-day spending, but a whopping near 40% increase on infrastructure. So that's buildings and equipment such as scanning equipment. Clearly, the NHS, the big political priority. And there's been plenty of politics at play here today. This is the first Labour Welsh Government budget in 14 years with a UK Labour government at Westminster, something they've been making great play about, of course, during the course of the day. But there is pressure as well. Those Senedd elections coming down the track, and Labour, the Labour Welsh Government, need to strike a deal with another party. They don't have a majority, and they need to do that in order to get this budget passed early in the new year. We'll assess all of that during the course of the programme. But first, here's the assessment of our money editor, Felicity Evans.
With more money to spend than he'd expected, Finance Secretary Mark Drakeford could splash the cash, giving every department a funding boost, as well as announcing more than £3 billion for infrastructure, things like houses, schools and NHS equipment.
In sector after sector, in health, education, higher education, bus travel and social care, this is a budget which increases spending most of all on the 20% of our population which has the least.
But for care homes like this one in Barry, there are unanswered questions. The social care sector has a key role to play in supporting the NHS.
On any given day, official statistics suggest there are around 1,500 people across Welsh hospitals stuck there because their care packages haven't been arranged. So the 4.3% increase in local council budgets has been welcomed because, among other things, local councils commission social care.
But the UK government is increasing national insurance, the tax employers have to pay per worker, putting extra costs on the system. And care home operators say they need someone to cover those costs.
We've estimated it's going to cost us about £75,000 more in our bills in the coming year, 25-26 year. And it's also approximately going to cost us about £27 a week at Springbank in what we need per resident per week from in our fees.
Wales will get some money from the UK Treasury to cover those costs in the public sector, but there's uncertainty over how much they'll get and whether private providers and charities will be included. Education receives an additional £83.6 million, an increase of 4.9%. Climate Change and Rural Affairs gets its budget increased by £36 million, or 6.6%, and Transport gets a whopping increase of £69.6 million. That 12% uplift is mainly driven by the expected end of the dualling of the Heads of the Valleys Road. The 11-mile Dowlais to Hirwaun stretch has been funded with private finance, leaving the Welsh Government with an annual bill of more than £30 million for building and maintenance over the next 25 years. Eligible small businesses will get one more year of 40% business rates relief.
We welcome the decision to maintain the 40% relief for hospitality, retail, leisure businesses. These are businesses that are core to our high street. They are experiencing some very, very difficult trading conditions at the moment.
Overall, health, social care and early years is getting an extra £435 million in day-to-day spending in 2025-26, an increase of 3.8%. Will it be enough to get those waiting lists down?
The NHS only accounts for about 10 to 20% of a person's health. So we need the support really in shifting resources towards preventative activities across the whole public sector, and the Welsh Government's budget is essential in enabling this.
With a Senedd election looming in 2026, the pressure is on Welsh ministers to get to grips with those record NHS waits. So what do voters make of the cash boost?
There's a lot of people out there who are desperate to have an operation of some sort, you know, and they just can't get one.
I had to go private. By the time I was waiting for what I wanted done, I would have had to give up my job.
The health service is the most important thing, isn't it? Seeing our doctors and getting things diagnoses and getting our, you know, everything's moved forward and getting things seen to, you know.
The additional money meant there was plenty of festive cheer for this draft budget. But money looks tighter in future years, so the pressure is on to make this extra cash count.
Our money editor Felicity Evans there. Well, earlier I caught up with the Finance Secretary Mark Drakeford, and I began by asking him what impact the increase in some of the budgets will have, particularly in the NHS.
There are two sides to the NHS story. There is the investment we are making, but there's also the demand that comes through the door. You know, 1.5 million people in Wales see their GP every month in Wales, in a population of 3 million. And so, as fast as we invest, there's more demand. We're an ageing population, we're able to do more.
I appreciate that, but we've got to break this cycle, haven't we? Well, you've been writing cheques for the Welsh NHS for years. You've talked about the past 14 years. Today, the NHS has had huge amounts. How do we break this cycle?
Well, you've got to do it on both sides. You have to invest. This budget will mean that people who work in our NHS will be able to have the best equipment, the most up-to-date equipment. They will be able to process more tests, look at more scans than they were previously. So there are efficiency issues that we need to tackle in the health service, but we've got to deal with demand as well. We've got to persuade people in Wales that there are things that they can do in their own lives that mean they won't need the health service in future.
How concerned are you about the increase in national insurance contributions and payments for example, the owners of care homes, which is a central bit in terms of trying to improve the NHS?
Well, there's nothing in today's budget that deals with employer national insurance because the Chancellor won't make her decisions on how much help we will get in Wales until May or June. Nor do we know exactly how many sectors she will help. They've started by saying they'll use the ONS definition, that's directly employed public services. You can be sure that the Chancellor is hearing from many groups, she's heard from the Welsh Government as well, about the need to see whether more help is available.
Yeah, because the suspicion is you'll give with one hand and take it away with the other.
Well, I can assure you, and as I've assured our local government colleagues and others, any money we get from the UK government to help with the costs of increased employer national insurance contributions will go straight from us to the people who need it. We will be a passport for it. There'll be no diversion of that money at all.
And you're going to have to get an agreement with another party. You've talked, I think, about a day of reckoning for Plaid Cymru. This is just upping the ante, isn't it? making it more difficult to get an agreement?
Well, this is the 26th year, I think, in which a government that has never had a majority has had to find a way of getting the budget passed. There is a challenge for other parties. I don't expect the Conservatives to support the budget. They're the formal opposition. But with parties where we have been able to work together in the past, the challenge for them is to work together again. My door is open to talk to those parties about how we improve the budget between the draft and the final budget. If they say to me, we're not interested in making improvements for the people of Wales, I think that is something that they will be held responsible for. My door is absolutely open to have those conversations.
Mark Drakeford there on some of the practical difficulties in terms of trying to get this budget voted through here at the Senedd. In terms of the broad contents of what was said today, obviously there was a far less enthusiastic response from the opposition parties. This is what they had to say.
This is a real mess. The government doesn't know where it's at as far as the Welsh Government's budget is concerned, and it doesn't look like the UK Government's got a handle on it either. The whole thing is disaster.
We now have Welsh Government's spending plans, and we're told that it is a major step change and that there is some more money. But frankly, after 14 years of Conservative austerity, is saying that something's a little bit better, that comes from a pretty low bar.
Once again, I plead with the Welsh Government to say to the UK Government that they have to get rid of the two-child benefit cap. Apart from that, we can increase childcare.
The opposition parties there. Right, I'm joined by our political editor, Gareth Lewis. Good evening, Gareth. A big day, lots of figures, lots of political pressure, of course. It's ramping up. What stood out for you?
There's an election coming, isn't there, in May 2026. The Welsh Government spending perhaps where you'd expect them to spend. Their Labour priorities, health and NHS, their number one priority. £81 million to build social homes, not even halfway to their target of 20,000 by the next election. A £25 million pothole fund in there as well. It's called a budget for a brighter future. That is the message that Labour ministers want you to hear. Whether you think it's transformative or not, or a government doing what it feels it can, is up to you, up to the voters, of course.
It is indeed. Now, of course, at a purely practical level, they've got to get this voted through. I asked Mark Drakeford about it. He said his door will be open. How do you see this playing out?
I think interesting, too, to pick up on those concerns over national insurance contributions. Been seized on by political opponents. Extra funding we expect to come for public sector employers, but concerns from charities and private companies about whether they will get any mitigation at all, even if they provide services for the public sector. Could be a story to watch. As for the deal, Plaid Cymru slightly taken aback by Mark Drakeford's comments about the day of reckoning. They would say the onus is on the Welsh Government to get that deal, and that's not the language of someone looking for a deal. Long run, it might suit them with the election coming, both parties to perhaps have that distance between them, which turns us to Jane Dodds, the sole Liberal Democrat, who perhaps dropped a little hint in her response to the budget, saying that £20 million announced for childcare papers over the cracks. Is that the hint as to where the Welsh Government might go with her? They've got time, though, because the vote on the budget isn't until March, and it'll perhaps give anybody minded to do a deal time to see exactly what happens with those national insurance contributions, because the money might be coming here, but if the NI contributions are as such and not mitigated, it could well, as the Conservatives say, go back down the M4.
Yeah, it could turn into a big story, that one, isn't it? We're all reading between the lines, all the hints and what is said leading up to that. Gareth, thanks very much indeed. OK, Lucy, that is it from me for now at the Senedd. I'll be with you later in the programme.
Looking forward to more from you a little bit later. For now, Nick, thanks very much. Almost 14,000 homes and businesses are still without power tonight, days after Storm Dara battered parts of Wales. One councillor in Pembrokeshire has said he fears people will die if their electric isn't restored soon. The National Grid said it's the biggest storm the region has seen in decades. Matt Murray reports.
Let's take a look. Oh dear.
It's been 4 days without power now for Carl Glaive. He lives in Hoyleglyn in the Avon Valley. His electric went when Storm Dara hit in the early hours of Saturday morning at around 3 a.m. Carl and his dog Zeus are trying to keep warm, but Carl says it's freezing and he's frustrated. All his food in his fridge freezer has now been ruined.
I can't buy nothing. I just got to live day by day now, because I don't know where to keep it. No fridge, no freezer, it's easier for me to leave the milk outside.
There are currently engineers on this hillside working on the power lines, but there's still 78 homes here, without electricity. And it's estimated that the power won't be back on until midday tomorrow. But other residents aren't reassured by the timeline, which they say has changed several times.
I can't see being on before the weekend. Can't.
How do you feel at the moment?
Angry, very angry. Fed up.
It's been absolutely freezing. I think what we've missed most is the light, because the light goes at about 4 o'clock.
The situation is the same in many villages across Wales. In Boncath, in Pembrokeshire, this is now a familiar sight as large trees down by the storm line the road. The power has been gone in parts of the village since the early hours of Saturday, and there's little certainty of when it will come back.
I've got a very horrible gut feeling that in a week's time, if we haven't got electricity, we're going to be losing people.
Half an hour or so away in Llandyssil, the leisure centre opened its doors to support those without power.
We're doing charging stations as well, so people can charge their phones and their tablets, just somewhere warm as well, and also you can come and have a shower as well. So we've been doing that for the last 2 days, and we'll do it until this ends.
It has been described by the National Grid as the biggest storm the region has faced in decades, with winds of up to 93 miles per hour.
As soon as we are aware of the situation, we respond immediately with generators. Even across the course of today, we've had 10 escalations come through to me personally, and we've responded those with either additional generators or providing additional information that they weren't aware of.
But for people like Carl, he says he feels he's been left in the dark with no power and a lack of information about why it's still not been restored.
A review has found that victims of child sexual abuse have been treated in a heartless, hostile and cruel way by monks on Caldy Island in Pembrokeshire. Caldy Abbey commissioned a safeguarding review into abuse that took place on the island by a monk there. The review found that numerous allegations of abuse were made but were not followed up or reported to police. A warning. This report from our social affairs correspondent India Pollock contains details of abuse.
It's not easy for Rebecca to look at photos from her childhood. A childhood she says was stolen by a monk who sexually abused her as she grew up on Caldy Island in Pembrokeshire. The island is owned by a group of Cistercian monks who live there. Rebecca's first memories of abuse are from when she was 3 or 4 years old.
In my childlike mind, knowing this shouldn't be happening to me, but not knowing how to get away from the situation. I just knew it was wrong, even at a young age, that an adult shouldn't be doing that to a child.
The review was commissioned after a long campaign by survivors. It's found that Thaddeus Kotick abused children like Rebecca in plain sight for 4 decades until he died in 1992. It says there were several missed opportunities to follow up on frequent and repeated allegations about Kotick. It also says the Abbey's response was hostile and cruel and further damaged victims and their families.
When somebody puts their hand up and says something horrible has happened to me, then it's a test of an organisation how it responds. The Abbey responded in a heartless way to victims who were very vulnerable and very damaged by what had happened at the hands of a monk, part of its community.
Rebecca says the response of the Abbey has made the trauma of her abuse 1,000,000 times worse.
I had so much feelings of self-hatred, worthlessness. All those feelings led me to self-harm and even several suicide attempts, and I used to run away constantly, but that would lead me into more bad situations, more dangerous situations, and I would meet the wrong men that would victimise me even more.
The new abbot of Caldy Abbey says improvements have already been made and he'll implement the report's 12 recommendations in full.
I'm very sorry for what they went through, and I would like to take the occasion to apologise for what they have gone through, for the pain and the suffering. And since I became an abbot, I took safeguarding as my priority, and I put everything in place so that it wouldn't happen again.
Other sex offenders spent time on Caldy too, the review says. They include Paul Ashton, a fugitive who was reported by a visitor and then jailed. He had unrestricted access to the IT system and used it to download indecent images of children, the review says.
They don't answer to no one, so it's complete and utter hypocrisy in the worst way, because you think that they're religious people and they're there to you know, help people, but that's the most opposite. You know, they're not close to God in any way.
Rebecca welcomes the review and says it does justice to her truth, a truth that she says has been hidden for decades.
India Pollock reporting, and if you've been affected by the issues raised in this story, you can find details of organisations offering information and support on the BBC Action Line website. Well, back to the Senedd now for more on the Welsh Government's draft budget from Nick. Back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Lucy. Inevitably, on a day like today, we bandy around huge figures, don't we, particularly in relation to the NHS. But we want to bring some of the personal stories behind that to you now and take you to the community of Llwyn Hendy, where people have been telling us how they feel forgotten about when it comes to healthcare services in the area where they live. Sarah Davitt has more.
The Christmas spirit has certainly arrived at this sports and social club, but there's little celebration when it comes to their local GP surgery.
Well, we're all angry, aren't we? Llanelli has gone completely forgotten about, hasn't it?
It's gone terribly and everyone's complaining.
How does that make you feel, being a resident in Llwyn Hendy?
We're not very safe, really.
Some are concerned that a new housing development and an 84-bed care home for the village will mean a higher demand for the health centre, making it even harder for the people here to get an appointment.
They just build houses and put no infrastructure in place. You phone at 8:30 in the morning, you're 60 behind, you can't get an appointment from one day to the next in surgery, and yet they're going to build houses.
In a statement on their website, Llwyn Hendy Health Centre are asking their patients to write to their local Senedd member to appeal to the Welsh Government for further funding. The health centre says that they receive just over £117 per year for each patient, which equates to 32 pence a day for every individual registered, something they say is less than the cost of an apple.
So I think there's a conversation to be had with the health board about how they can be supported to have a greater diversity, maybe some help with the building. But like every surgery, you know, we are putting a lot on the health service.
Last month, the minor injuries unit at Prince Philip Hospital became a daytime service only for the next 6 months. And according to the local councillor, the village needs more infrastructure to support the increase in people and the need for healthcare.
They haven't got enough rooms, they haven't got the infrastructure to be able to support the new developments, even allow their own residents at the moment.
The practice manager of Llwyn Hendy Health Centre told the BBC that new developments for the area are a concern, and the practice is working with the care home to ensure it won't impact current patients, adding that they, like GPs across Wales, are under increasing pressure due to chronic underfunding and resource shortages. The Welsh Government says that funding for general practice is negotiated annually between the Welsh Government, NHS Wales and BMA Cymru Wales. As people here prepare for the festivities ahead, all some want this Christmas is for their health services to improve and the funding to do so.
Right, we saw her report earlier in the programme, and Felicity Evans is with me now. Hi, Fliss. Just to start off then, a sense that lots of cash right now, but not necessarily for future years.
That's a really good point, and it's really important, isn't it? The Welsh Government gets most of its money from the UK Government, and in her budget, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves front-loaded a lot of spending, which means that Mark Drakeford got to spend a lot of money here in the budget for the next financial year. But what about the year after that, and the year after that, when it comes to creaking public services? And the UK Government has started its spending review now, and it will report in the spring, saying what it intends to do in the next few years. But certainly the way things are looking right now, it's looking very, very tight. So those taps could turn off again. So that means there's a lot of pressure to make this extra cash really count and get the most bang for the buck in terms of improving services.
Absolutely. And national insurance contributions, you touched on it earlier. How much of an issue is this?
I think this could be huge. I mean, it's something that the Welsh Government is going to say it isn't responsible for because, again, this is a tax rise on employers from the budget back in October. However, we heard in my report how much extra cost it's adding to one single care home. So I think there's a lot of concern, particularly amongst charities and private providers of services, about how clobbered they are going to be and whether or not they are likely to get any compensation for that. And that's a big unanswered question, and they will be desperate to know that answer.
OK, Felicity, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's get the weather forecast and hear from Derek in the studio.
Thanks very much, Nick. Well, there's more settled weather to come this week with lighter winds thanks to high pressure. A few spots of drizzle, frost and fog in places too. Now, it was bright and breezy in Penmaen on Gower today with a stripy pattern spotted in the clouds. That was caused by the northeasterly wind blowing across the hills and Banau Brycheiniog. Here's the picture in Carnarvon in Gwynedd, much clearer there with lots of sunshine, a great view from the castle towards the mountains and a high of 7 Celsius. Now tonight, generally plenty of cloud, but mostly dry, clearer in parts of the north and west. The wind easing, but staying breezy in the south. The lowest temperature around 4 Celsius in Newport, but in Gwynedd, somewhere like Pen y Groes could dip to -1 with a frost and a risk of fog. High pressure remains in charge tomorrow, centred over the UK. That means more settled weather. The cloud could be thick enough for a few spots of drizzle. Otherwise dry tomorrow. Bright in parts of the north and west. Like today, some sunshine in parts of Gwynedd and on Anglesey. The wind generally lighter, but still a breeze for Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. And the top temperature around 7 Celsius. Now, looking ahead to Thursday and Friday, plenty of cloud around. Misty in places with drizzle. Winds generally light with highs around 8 Celsius in Abergavenny, 6 Celsius in Aberdare. As for the weekend, brightening up on Saturday with a few showers. Milder on Sunday, and that's the story for next week. Temperatures rising above average, more unsettled later next week as well, with some rain and stronger winds. That's it. Back to Nick.
Derek, thank you very much indeed. So that is Wales Today. On the day, we had a Welsh Government budget with some significant increases across all departments. The big question, of course, is whether it can lead to those improvements in public services across Wales that so many people want to see. Any more details, you can, of course, get them on the BBC Wales News website. Until then, from the Senedd, that is Wales Today. Have a good night.